Okay, I'm going to pass out the blue sheets, and Kirsty's going to get us started.
Okay, yeah, hi everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kirsty, one of the co-chairs of SMART with Kathleen. So welcome to SMART's BOF session. Well, sort of.
It's not yeah, this is an IAB sponsored session, not a proposed research working group. We'd like to get to at least that phase, but we'll see what happens as a result.
So thank you. For anyone who's in Bangkok, we just wanted to briefly recap what we talked about in the planning meeting for SMART. So before we get started, IETF note well, please note well. I'd like this research group, or whatever it ends up becoming, to be friendly. So please respect speakers. And for this session, if you could hold all your questions to the end of the speaker's talk, that would be appreciated. So for the agenda today, this is what we've got. So we're starting off with some chair time, our charter and the group setup. And then we've got, sorry, I think this is actually the wrong version, but then we've got Symantec talking about the threat landscape, that's Arno. And then David McGrew will be talking about privacy and cybersecurity. Then we have Simon Edwards talking about testing, so anti-malware testing and how security products are actually tested and the rigor that goes into that. BGP hijacking from Toma next, a discussion of the problem space and some of the research that's ongoing. Arno is presenting on CLES, which is a draft that is uploaded on capabilities and limitations of endpoint security solutions. And then we have our tech director from NCSC, Ian Levy, talking at the end. I've just called his presentation One Snake because it doesn't really have a good title. And then we'll be finishing off with some more chair time. So the up-to-date agenda is on the session, but that's what we've got planned for the next 2 hours. So SMART, this is our headlines and what we discussed in Bangkok. We want to be the advisory research group on attack defense in the IETF-IRTF. So these are our 3 main goals: to research methods to efficiently and effectively detect, mitigate, prevent, or even eliminate threats, to guide IETF protocol development with a view, putting the cyber defense viewpoint across, and to become the authority on attack defense and prevention in the IETF-IRTF. So as a headline, that's what we're aiming to do. So when we're talking about the kind of research we would like to see, we're looking at case studies of previous incidents and attacks. We're looking at best practice. We want to stimulate new research into how we can find new methods to prevent, detect, and mitigate. We want to look at reports and statistics on the threat landscape so we know what we're up against. And these are just some research projects that we think would be good, including threat detection on encrypted traffic. And there's a whole set, I mean, this is just a small amount of the research that we aim to do in SMART. There is a huge problem, a huge landscape out there. So the landscape is broad, and so is what we want to look into. So I thought it would be worth posting just the first paragraph of our draft charter here, as it explains what we're trying to do here, to research the effect of existing, proposed, and newly published protocols and how they interact with attack defense. So we're wanting to get to the point where we have a good mixture of expertise in this room that can go to the IETF, go to IRTF, and bring that knowledge in so that when protocols are being designed, implementers, designers, and users will be better informed about the potential impact, positive or negative, of their new protocols on attack prevention and mitigation. So our draft charter is on GitHub. It's been there for quite a while. Please do read it, give us feedback on it on the list. It's still in draft, but this is what we're proposing to do. And then because it's quite hard to find some stuff on SMART, we've got a wiki page, we have got a mailing list, we've got a data tracker, a GitHub, and we've also got a page on Caris 2, which Kathleen will talk about more in a minute. But these are all of the places where you can find out more about what this group is trying to do and what it wants to be. So I'll just put them all in one page so you can have a look, and hopefully some of those are useful. And that's just a brief overview of what the group is trying to do as we set out on our first meeting.
So let's see, about 2 weeks ago on February 28th and March 1st, we held a workshop, ISOC sponsored workshop on coordinating attack response at internet scale. This was a follow-on workshop to one we had done initially 4 years ago that was IAB and ISOC sponsored. And there was more research that was presented here. These slides are just a snippet of what happened over those 2 days. They were packed with brainstorming activities to generate additional research ideas on top of what was presented from papers brought forth to attend the workshop. And so these were just some of the highlights. OpenC2 was discussed, and that's for exchanging information on indicators of response indicators of compromise and how you respond to those. So what actions you might take. NICT from Japan gave a couple, they had 2 different papers presenting work they have done, extensive work they've done on security automation and visualization. I can't do that justice in the very short time we have here, but that work was quite impressive. And their learnings from that and deficiencies in adoption of standards and how can we tackle those types of problems to further the ability to automate, right? So there was key areas where they were hindered in their abilities that would generate research that would be useful. And let's see, incident response coordination. We had several groups represented that do incident response coordination. The Forum for Incident Response and Security Teams, the chair was present, and he discussed what they've seen from their perspective, TF CERT, some community-based ones that were driven out of specific attacks, like the Mira attack. So we had different representations of groups that work in different ways, and I'll talk a little bit more about where that led in a couple of slides, and then some work from MapRG on IPv6 aggregation, and that was used as an example of things we might want to consider. So I personally found that a really good example of a case where you have researchers that are looking at measurement, but considering privacy in that. And I think if you couple those together, you may wind up with a better result than an arms race of one person worrying about measurement and the next group countering with privacy. So being able to couple those and bring those people together, I think is critical towards getting away from that arms race. And so that was highlighted just in terms of, the work itself, but also the thinking process. There were many different styles in the breakouts. This one was on incident response teams to see what could be improved. So how many people here have or currently work in an incident response team or have in the past? Oh, great, more than I would have expected. So that's pretty cool. What this was intended to do was to surface what's working for them and what's not working in the particular breakout that's pictured here. And we had each attendee, so everyone fully participated in every single breakout. Everyone had posties and had a certain amount of time to think about what is supporting incident response, what's holding it back, and what is looming ahead as a problem. So the iceberg is where things are looming ahead and are going to cause a problem. We're worried about those. You know, the wind is obviously the wind behind my sails, so things that are supporting the effort, and the anchor are things that are holding you back. And it got people to think a little bit more creatively, and I'll have a full report on this, but the workshop just took place, so the minutes are being finalized still, and then I'll get a first revision of the report out and probably have a co-author on that. And we were able to capture really good findings from that. And this is just a snippet of some of the output that came from that particular breakout. So they have huge problems. Incident response right now is isolated into small groups, trust groups, and how they exchange data. They sometimes, so if you're at a corporation, you typically have like 8 feeds of data that are mostly overlapping, but you get each of these feeds so that you get that one nugget of information that might come on one feed, not the others. It's a lot to manage, and it's really aimed at large companies right now. So the partners of those organizations are really left in places where they can't manage the security of their environment because they don't have the resources to do so. And the last number I heard is that we're at a 2 million person deficit in information security, which is what has motivated me on Carousel the first time and the second time to run this workshop. And there's so many add-on products that are not helping. So I think we have to completely flip how security is done by the practitioner, and research is needed to help to do that flip so that security becomes manageable. Right now, it's completely unmanageable. And we are never going to, in my opinion, we're never going to fill that gap with training, which is a lot of the efforts towards trying to fill that gap in information security professionals. So I just don't see that happening. So we'll have a really nice summary that I think could lead to productive research and understanding the problems they face and how they work, and subsequent workshops on this can help as well. And actually the people present asked that we dive into that even deeper on a subsequent workshop, and offered sponsorship of another workshop. So I think Carousel will be something that can continue and possibly feed SMART for research, which would be helpful. Then we had multiple breakouts on brainstorming where people can work together, right? So trying to make sure that people were pretty open with their idea sharing. And this is just a snippet, but with each of the ideas that came forward, people put their hands up and said they're going to work on these ideas. So hopefully of some of the ones that came forward, we'll get some drafts generated. So fingerprinting, then there was SNARC had a lot of positive reception to use trust indicators to make decisions about good and bad actors. So that one was received really well. I think a number of people wanted to help work on that. So I would hope to see that one go forward. Attack coordination solutions and automation, that's always an ongoing theme, but we haven't done well at it yet. And we did compare a bunch of the efforts out there, what works, what doesn't work, why is there adoption for some, why not, so that if we go to design something, we are thoughtfully thinking on those types of aspects as well. Cryptographic rendezvous, and then problems with L2 discovery with some other protocols and information revealing, and how do we bake in more security into existing protocols, and what kind of concerns should we be highlighting to improve protocols elsewhere, right? So that advice piece Kirsty was talking about. Okay, I think that's it. And a full report will be forthcoming.
Okay, so our first speaker that we have is Arno, who's talking about the threat landscape. So one of the aims of this session is to get a good grounding in onboarding everyone into what we mean by cybersecurity and what the group is trying to achieve. I think we just have a quick question before we start.
Yeah, Lisa, good. Sorry, I don't know if you wanted to have questions. It sounded like you wanted them after each presentation, and you just finished one. So I figured this would be the time. So going forward for the rest of the session, for me, it would be helpful to understand what kind of group you want to be, because I'm confused.
We would like to be a research group.
Okay, thank you.
Or we could be a kind of group that generates work that gets shared out to working groups. Or it's a bit flexible, but.
So
the or confuses me again.
Yeah, so my opinion, well, it's been a difficult process to get to this point, right? So I think we're just a little confused as well. So if we had our choice, I think it would be to be a research group. And similar to CFRG, there might be areas where there could be advice or there could be work that comes this way that really should get put into like SEP dispatch or something.
Okay, thank
But
you.
to do the research.
So the goal is RG.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Hi. Good afternoon. So my name is Arnaud Tadei. I work at Symantec. I'm Swiss and French, so sorry for my French accent. So today I'm going to speak about the threat landscape update from the IETF. That's a very well-known report from my company. We issue it every year. That's the volume 24. I'm not one of the authors of this. My good Swiss friend from Zurich, Candide West, is one of the authors, so he's the person who is rewriting it. So I try to take questions, but so for those who don't know, the IETF is a big report. It's around this year 60 pages. It's full of numbers. You have many breakdowns by country, by task, by a lot of various ways. But we try to simply give back what we learned from the last year. So this is the report from 2018. All right. Okay, so is this working? No? Oh, yes. Okay, yes. All right, so I'm not going to take you the whole afternoon on numbers, but just try to summarize a few trends that we observed. The first four categories are about focused on profit. That means that the cybercrimes try to get money out of the attack. So the newcomer this year was the form jacking. So form jacking is based on JavaScript attacks, and it's really about a transparent attack on where you do payments and so on to get your information, your PII and so on. So we could clearly see a trend there with around nearly 5,000 websites were compromised by form jacking attacks every month. We blocked around 4 million form jacking attacks last year from endpoint devices, and the problem is that it's a difficult one to detect by end users. So that's a painful one that arrived on the market of the cybercrime. The other one is crypto jacking. So this one is known, there is nothing new, but as you can see, overall, it declined, right? So it decreased because the value of the cryptocurrency has decreased. So you can clearly see the correlation between attacks and profit. So it remained at high levels, so especially in December 2018. The other piece which is interesting is that in 2017 we got one malicious URL over 16, and now we are down to 1 per 10 URLs. So there is clearly some patterns there. All right, thank you. Next slide. Maybe we are attacked.
Yeah, so these happened plenty in the last issue.
Okay. All right, let's do it manually.
See what happens this time.
Okay. So two other forms of profit attacks were ransomware on device, of course. So ransomware, we could clearly feel already in 2017 that it would decline, and it declined by 20%. Now, it's not the only important number. What is interesting here is the attack move to enterprise ransomware. So a lot more companies got attacked on ransomware, and especially mobile ransomware infections were up by 33%. Now, if you look at smartphones, this is an important category, of course, because a lot happens on the device. So we had 1 in 36 mobile devices were at risk from an app perspective, but the concern is that, of course, the devices are not kept up to date. So we have only 23% of Android phones that run the latest major operating system version. And interestingly enough, on iPhones, we are only at 78%. So it leaves a room it leaves a window for attack. So nothing special there. The other piece that starts to be concerning is the increase on social media, especially on fake news. I think this is certainly a topic that will increase year over year, so we expect to have more problems through fake news and propaganda next year. So that's for the categories on profit. So I think the first takeaway is that form jacking appeared. The three others, it's interesting, they have declined, but there are some specifics in each of them. Okay, let's continue. So now let's move to two types of attacks. So here we have something that is not new. Attacks on Internet of Things are not new. We can see that we have 75% of compromised devices were routers. That's a problem. Cameras are following with 15%. So we all remember what happened with Mirai and what happened to a number of parties like Deutsche Telekom and others. That been very painful, and we see that the pattern is basically staying what it is. Of course, the major concern is with 5G coming, we are going to have many devices that will stay connected all the time, so there we have direct connection, so we expect that is going to worsen. The typical problem is weak passwords and device exploits. That's the two principal causes. So providers or vendors are not making enough efforts to get it just correct, which could inform us on Internet of Things actions. And what it is used for, well, no surprise, distributed denial of service, cryptojacking, ad fraud, and other methods. So we expect this to continue next year. The newcomer on these categories is cloud. Cloud environments are now becoming more and more under attack. We could see that on AWS, Azure, Kubernetes, Docker, serverless applications. So, of course, we know that AWS S3 buckets got a big leak, but we have seen a lot of data breaches going through cloud environments. One of the issues that's very concerning is vulnerabilities in hardware chips. We all know of Meltdown and Spectre, but there are others that happen. I think the concerning one is actually SDN exploits. That's going to be interesting with many operators and other bodies building massive infrastructure. We are going to have an attack surface that's going to increase, and of course people will try to attack there. The most concerning one would be a silent attack. You are breached and you don't know. That would be terrible. Okay, let's continue. We finish with this one. So we finish with two categories. So targeted attacks is not new. We know we have it since quite some time now. In fact, we debated if is ransomware a targeted attack or not. We could discuss that. Would be a good topic for SMART, actually. Of course, they remain undetected as long as possible. They are long attacks. Spear phishing remains the primary vector, 65%. What was interesting is that the main motive is intelligence gathering. So 96% by large. And APT groups are going, after ICS and IoT. The other observation is that they are not using as many 0 days vulnerabilities as before. I think it declined to 23%. And finally, we have living off the land types of attacks and supply chain attacks. Here, the most surprising one was the use of malicious PowerShell scripts that increased by 1,000%. So they are really insisting on that. And the other concerning numbers are Office files, 48% of malicious email attachments, up from 5% in 2017, and supply chain attacks with up by 78% in 2018. And that's it for now. Thank you very much.
So questions, Mike?
Mike.
Hello, I'm Daniel Kahn-Gilmore from the ACLU. I just had a couple of clarifying questions about some of the statistics that you quoted. Can you go back one slide? Can you just clarify what you mean by supply chain attacks there?
Well, attacks on the supply chain, meaning the supply chain we know, right?
We're talking about hardware supply chain, software supply chain, all of the.
It's a composite number. I mean, the report is pretty big on the breakdown, so
Okay.
would need to. I mean, I'm happy to discuss with each of you offline for each of the numbers. It's 60 pages, and each page contains a massive.
Understood. I just was trying to get a sense of roughly where in the supply chain you were talking about. The other question that I had, there 2 slides maybe before. You had some large percentage of, one more back, of URLs contained cryptojacking.
Cryptojacking, the one before.
Is that 10% of all URLs, period? What does that mean? 1 in 10 URLs has cryptojacking in it? Like if I have 10 tabs open in my browser, like
Yeah.
pretend I had 10 tabs open in my browser.
Yes.
My name is Karan. I'm from the Center for Internet and Society. I have 2 questions. One about the form jacking attacks. Which vulnerability of law were they exploiting when, inserting the scripts? Was it a cross-site scripting? Cross-site script injection, or did they have other access to the server somehow? That's the first question. And the second question is why the fake news / misinformation bit was included as a trend under smartphones.
Okay, we'll answer the second one. You are right. It's difficult to put 60 pages into all categories. I think the point on social media is it an attack on the device, or is it an attack on the brain? I would argue it's an attack on the brain. So in this case, it should be a separate category. But we just wanted to be mindful that this is concerning and growing, and so we just put it in a category. That's all what it meant. There's nothing more.
And for the form jacking question?
So for the form jacking question, it's if I remember correctly in the report, these are attacks led by match cards or something like this. I forgot the attack type, so I would have to really look what it is. It's JavaScript based most of the time, but on the cross, you asked from the cross site, right? Yeah, I would have to really check what it really means, if we have captured that or not.
Okay, and I'm just going to make a note that we'll cut the line after this, and I think you can finish. I just want to make sure we cut the line there, and then for these unanswered questions on the list, we can get to them.
Sure.
Watson Ladd, I'm from Cloudflare. So I have very little experience like incident reporting or anything like that. What do you do with numbers like these? Like, you can't block all Office attached. It's not going to work. So why does it matter if it's 50% or 20% and 80% PDF? Like, how do you redeploy resources in response to these numbers?
Well, that's a fair question. So we have a lot of parties that actually using these numbers. There is a lot of constituencies around us, governments, enterprise, consumers, that have all sorts of concerns. And so we prepare this document to make sure at least they understand which trends we are. So, for example, ransomware is now on the decline. And so we are trying to give trends. We are trying to help people to understand.
If I could interject, I mean, corporations do quarantine and scan before people open these. So the information is useful. And they're constantly worried about data leakage and theft of their, data leakage, right? So theft of their data. So the data is used.
And
Yeah,
also, you need to know what the problem space is to be able to do the research. So if we see something's on the rise, then that's where you would focus your research.
So in practical terms, this is used in security operation centers, for example. People need to understand what to do with it, to train their people. So that's what they do with it. Yeah.
Elliot here, and I think the co-chair just actually touched on my question, which is these are interesting numbers. And the question is, what should a research group here do with them? What is you have this gentleman present, so now the question is, I think it was motivating, but what is it we're supposed to take from this as motivation?
Right. First, that was Elliot Lear. Oh, he did? I did not hear him say his name. Sorry. It could be used by people who are unaware of the threat space to look into something that might be a rising threat, which Kirsty had said. So I think their team uses it, their research team uses it in that regard, but others could as well.
This is No Hats here. I think that there's a research area in also trying to decide how to manage resources for security,
Yes.
for dealing with security problems.
Yes.
And there's, actually you could get some of the folks who work on that and work on how do you think about it, because you have, all sorts of game theoretic and other issues about, is this the one I need to put my resources in or another one? And how do they interact and things.
Right, and thank you. That's actually one of the themes we'd like to hit on this is how do we make information security management more efficient and researching that aspect, right? So that's one of the reasons for CARIS. And that's one of the reasons we'd like to push this in the research area because of the 2 million person deficit in professionals that I don't think will ever be filled, right? So I think we have to do things differently, and I think the time is ripe to flip how information security is done by practitioners completely around.
Wes
The line
Hardiker.
was cut, but
Oh.
go ahead quick. Just
Wes
make it real
Hardiker,
quick.
ISI, how are you going to change the internet with this information? And I can see this driving research in many different ways, including, prioritizing things. The thing I worry about is that research is often slower than trend tracking, so be careful about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so next we have David McGrew.
Hi, David McGrew, Cisco. So, whoa, watch your step. So it's hard to read this slide, right? Because I wanted to put this beautiful graphic of the astronomical clock. It's really cool. You should go see it if you haven't seen it yet. My presentation is entitled Malicious Uses of Evasive Communication and the Threats They Pose to Privacy, right? So the important thing about this is, so I'm going to be talking about ways that evasive communication is used by malware. And I want to explain the motivations of the malware operators. I want to explain their goals, explain how they're using evasive communication, and try to provide some of the perspective of, say, an incident responder or somebody trying to defend a lot of data. So I want to start off with what I think is a really important statement here, right? I'm not dissing evasive communication. I want to emphasize, right, privacy is a human right. Encryption is a cornerstone of modern society, right? So we should all use encryption to provide privacy. It's essential because of criminals, corporations, governments, and individuals that pose a threat to privacy. And there's a lot of good encryption protocols and evasive communication protocols whose goal is to protect privacy, and that's a really good thing. So my focus is going to be not on the protection of the data in motion, say in a single session, which is the focus of a lot of IETF protocols. Instead, I'm going to be talking about attacks that are more on the information systems being run by the client or on the server side by the organization running all the servers, right? So I'll call that client side and server side in the presentation here. So I want to define evasive communication by its technical goals, right? So this would be in the security sense, right? In the security consideration section or the research analysis, you'd want to define these goals, right? So data confidentiality, through encryption is used to provide data privacy. That's a commonplace benign goal that we all rely on every day. There's also the goal of evading blocking. So this is used in censorship circumvention, right, which is a popular benign use. There's the ability to visit a targeted site without detection, right? So in the research community, people use the phrase targeted site, and this is the closed world model of website fingerprinting, for example. If you have, you're in a country that doesn't want you to visit certain places on the internet, and they're wondering if you actually visit them or not, right? So That's what I mean by targeted site here. So the benign use of this is obviously privacy. And the hardest goal of all in this space is communication without detection. In other words, I want to go to a country where they don't want me to visit someplace on the internet. I want to visit that place, and I don't want them to even know that I'm visiting. I'm using any evasive communication at all. So that's the goal, is to hide circumvention. And so that's actually a very hard goal to achieve. So, you know, these goals might be applicable to a bunch of work at the IETF, domain fronting, DOH, DOT, encrypted SNI, and, you know, a bunch of other things, right? And maybe not all these goals apply, but there are plenty of good benign uses, and, you know, we want these capabilities in our protocols. Next slide, please. So, but unfortunately, you know, bad guys have similar goals, right? So, you know, bad guys want to use data confidentiality to hide their activities from the people defending the information systems they're attacking. They want to evade blocking so that malware can carry out its fundamental mission, which would be infection, command and control, and data exfiltration most often. And they want to be able to visit and target sites without detection, because this enables them to minimize what are called the indicators of compromise, right? So an IOC is, you know, for example, there's lists of IP addresses that are known to be compromised and are hosting malware servers, right? So there's literally millions of those things, but there's millions of infected sites, right? But you know, tens of thousands of known active bad servers you can download from several security vendors, that sort of thing. So malware wants to be able to avoid that, right? They don't want to show up on an IP watch list. And then, of course, the major goal for any you know, really serious attacker is hide the fact that you've infected your victim. So, you know, there are malicious uses for these goals. So let me talk a bit about client-side attacks on privacy. Now I want to focus entirely on privacy, okay? You know, we heard earlier about, you know, some security concerns, and I don't want to think about security. I want to focus on privacy of individuals, right? Now, security technologies are used to protect data, and including personally identifiable information. But on the client side, there's a more direct threat to privacy. So here I've got a quote. Remote administration Trojans, you know, is the Trojan or tool. Trojan is usually used when the tool is malicious. Rats provide the ability to remotely survey the electronic activities of a victim by key logging, remote desktop viewing, webcam spying, audio eavesdropping, data exfiltration, and more. Okay, but please note, this quote is from a Citizen Lab report on how citizens were targeted by a repressive government, right? This is not some kind of claptrap from some vendor giving a pitch at RSA, right? This is from this quote about the capabilities of this tool is specifically about somebody trying to defend privacy. Next slide, please. So Syria provides an unfortunate in-depth look at this sort of thing. So they've been targeted, you know, activists there have been targeted by malware. I've got a list of, I don't know what that is, something like 7 different rats that were documented in attacks against citizens in Syria. Note also, FreeGate is a secure messaging application. It's provides like a VPN service. So that thing, an infected FreeGate client was propagated. I think other evasive communication applications were used in this sort of attack. And so it's really well documented for Syria, but you can see the same thing against activists, lawyers, and journalists in countries like Mexico, Azerbaijan, Egypt, UAE, and other places. In some cases, these are where one country wants to spy on its neighbors or something like that. But these are all serious threats to privacy. And so the important thing is here that evasive communication is critical to how a rat operates, right? So if you want to prevent this sort of thing, you need somebody to be watching for this sort of exfiltration. And somebody doesn't have to be the network. It could be if you trust your OS vendor, if you trust some other application provider. you know, if you trust your ISP or, you know, some third party or whatever, right? But, you know, somebody's got to be paying attention. Next slide. So I wanted to provide some documentation, you know, I encourage you to look up these articles if you're interested. Frankly, it's really depressing to research this kind of thing, but there's a lot of good documentation. And so the boy next door who accidentally built a Syrian spy tool is a really good read if you haven't seen that one. And maybe I'll just move on to the next slide. So let's forget about the client side for now and think about the server side. When I say server side, I don't just mean a single server, right? I'm talking about a data center probably that's holding you know, a lot of data. It might have, you know, 3 tiers in it. You know, it's going to be complex. It's going to have a lot of devices. It might be powering a cloud provider. It might be in a content distribution network. It might be in an enterprise, right? But this is what I mean by server side, right? There's big complex systems that hold personally identifiable data and other privacy relevant data. So I've got a quote here I want to share with you. First, let me explain. This is from Rob Joyce of NSA's Tailored Access Operations Unit, right? So if you're paranoid about the NSA and you don't know what TIO is, then you should learn about them, and then you should be even more paranoid. So this is a quote from a great Wired article. They covered his talk at, I forget if it was Black Hat, I think it was Black Hat a couple of years ago. So what he said was, with any large network, I will tell you that persistence and focus will get you in, will achieve that exploitation without 0 days. There are so many vectors that are easier, less risky, and often more productive than going down the 0-day route. So here's somebody telling us, you don't even need the sophistication of 0-day, you just need to be persistent. You need to understand your victim's network better than the victim does, right? That's actually what he says in that article. So we should really be concerned about this, right? We should be concerned that it's hard to defend something like a data center, and the confidence that this gentleman has in how easy it would be. And of course, he wants the world to improve its security posture, so it was nice that he gave the talk. Okay. So I don't have a lot of detailed references about the server-side threats to privacy, but let's see. So here, instead I have a graphic. It's too difficult to count. This is actually from, I have the citation on the slide. I think it's just not legible right here. But it's an infographic that represents breaches due to hacks. In other words, there was actual malware involved as opposed to just some sort of accident. And to emphasize, you know, I want to provide a concrete example that relates this to privacy. So there were 3 major hacks of dating sites, including the Friend Finder network and Ashley Madison and another one, that exposed hundreds of millions of people. Homosexuality is illegal in 70 countries, and the personal impact of being on one of those accounts that was hacked there would be a serious privacy violation. And so, you know, I think we need to think about the privacy issues here, not in terms of there's some big dumb vendor that values security and not privacy. No, there are big dumb vendors that want to use security to defend personally identifiable information. So next slide. So here's a quick slide illustrating how important communication is when somebody wants to attack something like a data center. There's usually an initial infection that involves communication, a secondary download of the tools actually used in the exploit, like a rootkit or whatever. There's command and control that's ongoing, data exfiltration, and then there's often some sort of exploitation of the data, like you learn somebody's account information. Next slide. And stolen passwords are a really big deal, of course, in privacy and in server-side security, right? So if you haven't looked yourself up on Have I Been Pwned, you know, please do so. So let me show some data on malware's use of evasive communication. So this is the original content, and I'm going to credit my colleague Blake Anderson for this work. So here we're reporting data that, so we've worked with people who operate a commercial malware sandbox. We have something like 6 months of data where malware completed some just south of 2 million TLS sessions. So a malware sandbox is a place where samples are submitted, where somebody thinks something is malicious. The sandbox will let it run and basically wants it to, try to engage in malicious activity. That activity is observed, and of course it's observed in a fishbowl. So you can see exactly what sort of network activity it does. You can get a strong conviction that it is actually malicious. In this case, we're excluding adware, right? So if you actually look at so-called malware, a lot of it's actually adware. So it's, is that really malicious, right? It just wants to sell somebody's clicks. So we're excluding adware, and we're only reporting malware that has very strong convictions on it. In other words, multiple AV signature hits. So what we observed is that something less than 10% of these TLS sessions are actually using some kind of dedicated evasive communication technology, right? So like Tor, UltraSurf, Xiphon, and so on. There's also non-standard ports, right? Which, you might consider that evasive. In other words, doing TLS, but you're not on 443, you're trying to sneak out over, say, the 22 or something like that, or 53. So, the observations on this, right? Malicious actors are absolutely using evasive communication technologies. And if you're in the business of hunting malware, you would look at this and say, there's these things that somebody's gone to the trouble of using some evasive communication technology. That's probably more interesting, even because it's rare, right? But it's less than 10%. So, most malware authors don't feel the need to do this. But certainly there's some awareness of how to engage in this sort of activity. So, and just for completeness, the TLS sessions often visit benign sites, right? So I don't know if you're aware that malware uses benign sites all the time for exfiltration and command and control and infections, right? So here are the, Dropbox is most popular, no shock there. So I want to, kind of sum all this up with a scenario. I want to characterize this as blowback against privacy, right? So blowback in like the military intelligence term means when, like when you use a weapon and then like there's something like in the discharge of gases that blows back on the person who pulled the trigger and that has some harm, right? So in other words, it's an unintended consequences that gives you the opposite of what you wanted, right? So suppose we have somebody who's an individual who uses a privacy network to visit someplace on the internet, evading censorship, and then somebody uses the privacy network to exfiltrate data from the data center, right? So they get some bad person gets a hold of the PII using some sort of evasive communication, right? So, I mean, this literally could use the same privacy network. So that's an unintended consequence. And, I earlier used the homosexuality example, and it would be easy to come up with news stories about religious minorities, democracy advocates, and journalists. So regardless of what your political leanings are, there's a victim out there that could fit this scenario. So I wanted to highlight research questions, right? Because I think the IRTF is a great institution, and in the context of what could we bring to the IRTF, here are some research questions. Can malware's use of evasive technology be further characterized, right? So obviously, we showed some preliminary data, and there is, we're sure that better numbers could be had, and the counts could be higher with more study. So can evasive technologies prevent malware from utilizing their services without reducing privacy for other users, right? In some ways, this is it, right? I mean, that's exactly what we want. We want there to be no blowback when we help individuals achieve privacy. Can an evasive client or OS provide a strong assurance of the absence of malicious or unauthorized communication to its user or administrator? So this exactly would help those people targeted in the Syrian news reports, right? They want to be able to get a piece of software, use that software for their own private communication, but then also know that that private VPN isn't being used against them to communicate their activities back to some actor who's wants to squelch their activities. And lastly, for protocol designers, can you prevent or mitigate malicious uses like the ones outlined here? So that concludes the presentation. I want to thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And we have a short time for questions on this because it ran a little over. So we'll just take a few and later. So we'll cut this real short. So I apologize. But that was very useful. So thank you.
Hi, Stephen Frost. Thanks for the presentation. If you go back to your research questions. So I can only imagine if there are answers to some of these, they might be answered on different timescales. So for example, I think the answer to the first one seems to be yes, that there's work that could be done there. It's not clear that the answer to the second one isn't no. But if it is not no, then I suspect that may take a long time to find out. So I think there's different kind of horizons here of when work might be relevant. So I'm not sure how that impacts on whether a research group could be effective or not.
That's a good question, and I'll say that I tried very hard to not suggest any research directions, right? And a bunch of folks that I talked to, getting feedback about this was, they had some ideas on, what could Tor do to prevent, malware from communicating either on ingress or egress, and like you say, it's a huge topic. Not clear what the best place to do it is, but I think it's absolutely a valuable research question.
Yeah, on that, I was just going to amplify the Tor point. On the second question, there is some very early stage research right now within the Tor community trying to mitigate abusive traffic that goes through Tor with the hopes of, kind of improving the reputation of Tor and allowing it to be used more broadly.
Hi, this is Daniel Kahn-Gilmore from the ACLU. Thanks for the presentation and for the research that went into it. I would be curious to follow up with you later about some of the details of the numbers that you got and where that comes from. One of my big concerns here is how we as network designers determine malicious uses from beneficial uses, because I want to recognize that one person's subversive terrorism is another person's seeking democracy advocacy, and I think that's a very difficult challenge to try to address here. I fully agree with you that the massive amounts of data stored on cloud servers on behalf of people represents real privacy risks. But I'm not convinced that the network protocols are the way that the network protocols can distinguish between those cases. And so I'm happy to continue talking about this and try to figure out how we can distinguish between those cases. But I want to flag that as potentially impossible problem.
So I think, one question I put forward would be, if you're defending a data center that has a lot of personally identifiable information on it, would you allow unrestricted, unmonitored Tor communication from the entire data center out to the internet? And if the answer would be no, do we want to have how would you want to enable that? And like you say, we should follow up maybe.
Yeah, I think follow up because we're over on our agenda now. Thank you very much.
So next we have Simon talking. This is on testing for the good of the internet. So Simon is from an anti-malware testing lab. So we wanted to invite him today to talk through how products are tested and to show the methodology that goes into endpoint security and security testing.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name's, Freddie Mercury moment. My name's Simon Edwards. I'm from SE Labs, but also the Anti-Malware Testing Standards Organization. Very briefly, what that is all of the antivirus companies that you've heard of get together with people like me who test their products and massively argue about how we test their products. We're a London testing lab. That's the building we're in currently, and we work with those vendors, but also those vendors' customers. So if you're a very big company, you might say, well, why would I spend $1 million on Cylance or Symantec or whatever? And they'd talk to us and we'd help them do some proof of concept testing, that kind of thing. We'll look at endpoint software, so anti-malware, EDR, that kind of thing, but also cloud services. So if you're going to protect your organization by putting an email gateway in, for example, maybe in the cloud, maybe on-prem, we can look at that kind of stuff too, and also big network boxes as well. The reason that we're doing this work is because of marketing bullshit, basically. There's an awful lot of it around. It was bad in the 90s and the 2000s. It got worse when the next-gen antivirus guys came along and said that AV is dead. What you really want is machine learning and artificial intelligence, which has been around for ages anyway. And when people are charging millions of dollars for those kinds of products, we think it's fair to actually test them and see if they do what they claim to do. One really important thing about testing, in my opinion, is it has to be realistic. If you just grab a bunch of malware samples from VirusTotal, or even if you write your own, that's not necessarily what the real customers are seeing in the real world. So there are lots of reasons I could spend half an hour talking about VirusTotal and why you shouldn't use it for testing, so I won't. What I would say is the most important point to get across is to do the full attack chain when you do a test. If you just run a VM and drag a piece of malware onto the desktop of that virtual machine and your next-gen Sentinel-1 or whatever detects it, that's not very realistic because victims in the real world aren't doing that. What they're doing is downloading emails or visiting malicious websites. Different vectors are available for malware and other types of attacks. We should use those when we do testing. And what we shouldn't do is to trust what the products say. So if I'm doing a test and Symantec Endpoint Protection says, I've detected a threat, well, it's detected a threat, great. But then it might claim it's protected against that threat. But we'd have to use forensics to prove that because we can't trust the products. And so we do, we use forensics, digital forensics. We'll analyze memory, we'll look at the changes on the file system, network traffic, that kind of thing. And once we've identified a problem, we don't just say, bad luck, we're going to write a mean report about you, or well done, here's a nice badge, which we do as well. We will also provide evidence, the goal being to improve the product. If we found problems, those problems should be solved. So it's on us to provide enough evidence to prove we're not making it up and enough information so they can fix the issue. When you make a test, you can't assume how the ideal product would work. If you can write the best URL reputation system in the world, and I'm visiting lots of bad URLs, then you should be able to ace that test. If I think it should be a signature-based detection thing, and I ignore the URLs, then your product will fail hard, even though in the real world it would do very well. So a test has to be flexible enough to take into account all the possible approaches that a vendor might make or take, which sounds impossible until you think, well, why don't we just act like real attackers? And then all that problematic stuff goes away. You could, for example, do a test with millions of virus samples dating back to 1983. I don't know how useful that would be. Most of those wouldn't execute on Windows 10 anyway. So why don't we just take a few targeted attacks that we roll up in the last year or so and see how they do? Because after all, that's what these products say they're going to protect you against. Might as well move on. I think prevalent threats are really important. If I go around the internet and find all sorts of edgy, weird things, that doesn't really tell you how a product is going to protect customers. But if I read the internet threat reports from Symantec and other vendors, if my team go out and find stuff that's affecting customers in real time, which is exactly what we do, then we can see what happens when we expose the products to the threats. But what we shouldn't do, and no one should do this, is to take a feed of threats from any vendor. So for example, if I'm going to compare, I'm going to pick on Symantec again, Symantec with Kaspersky Lab, only because there are two guys in the room from Symantec. If I'm going to compare those two companies' products, and I take samples from Symantec, clearly the test is biased. If I take them from Kaspersky, it's biased. If I take it from both of them, it's biased, because we're testing an industry on what it already knows, and that's no good. Well, how about I take a feed from McAfee, because they're not in this test? Well, the problem there is that all of these companies share threats. They might not share all of the threats with each other, but they do share threats. So maybe McAfee and Kaspersky has a really nice sharing relationship. So now the test is biased in favor of Kaspersky. It's impossible to know about all those background sharing relationships, which is why it's not sensible to take a feed from vendors, and it's not necessary either. Advanced persistent threats are really interesting. Targeted attacks are really interesting. You saw earlier there was a mention of PowerShell. We see loads of PowerShell stuff at the moment. Lateral movement's important as well. If you're testing a product like CrowdStrike or Cylance, they might not detect the malware that first hits the system, but when you start misbehaving, remember, full attack chain, malware comes along, bad things happen, I get a reverse shell, I start dumping hashes, whatever. The minute I maybe pivot to a different system, that's when I'm detected. But if you just stop the test when you get the reverse shell and say, oh, well, I could do something bad, so the product's failed, that's not really fair. That's when the test starts, not when it finishes. I'm just going to skip the next bit, so move on from that, please. Yeah, don't worry about that. Next, thank you. So is it possible for someone like me or someone like you to behave like an APT? FireEye didn't used to think so. They said you have to actually be a cyber criminal or a nation-state organization to be an APT. That's nonsense. There are lots of different ways to be an APT and lots of different types, because not every government or not every nation-state has the same level of resources. If you want to pit Mossad against Hamas, they have different levels of resources. Mossad perhaps less than Hamas. No, other way around. Other way around. We already heard that people are using less 0 days. That's because there's no need to. We already heard that quote about Rob Joyce about the NSA using persistence rather than 0 days. There are actually reasons not to use 0 days. I know a guy that used to run a UK intelligence agency who, when I asked him, do you guys use Metasploit when you hack other countries? He said, well, we don't hack other countries, obviously. But if we did, we would use these frameworks because everyone knows how to use them, so they're scalable, and you can't attribute them because you can download them for free. Whereas if you start writing 0 days, it's expensive, and there are details in there that might link back to you. So if you see strange Chinese characters, or if you see the CNCs are being run during Philippine working times, all these little clues can give you away. If you download Metasploit or just the Kali Linux distribution, you can do loads without having to get all Stuxnet on everyone's ass. I might as well just skip this bit because we've already done that. Right, okay, bit rude, this one. Hacking team, Italian company, bit offensive, literally in many ways. They sell malware to governments for surveillance purposes. They claim only to work for nice governments, whatever that means. And so what they did was sell nasty stuff to not very nice governments. I think we'd probably agree, the ones that kind of torture dissidents and things like that. So what was I going to say about that? Yeah, so this guy or girl, Phineas Fisher, hacked Hacking Team and leaked all of the information. So you can see invoices, you can see how much it cost, you can see how thoroughly incompetent the different government employees were when it came to troubleshooting the stuff, the support. If you want a laugh, download it because the support tickets are really funny. But anyway, Hacking Exposed came out, that second edition in 2002, and 15 years later, Phineas Fisher hacked Hacking Team. And a year later, he or she published how they did it. And it might as well just be from the last page of Hacking Exposed. It's an absolute playbook of how to do it. It's just hacking. Anyone can do it. It's quite easy. This is a concept that we came up with a long time ago to try and fend off FireEye's view that you can't be an APT. You can have someone down that end who has zero resources, and someone at the other end, someone who's capable of writing a Stuxnet type malware framework, and people in between. But actually the reality is, even if you can make Stuxnet, you will be doing all of these other things as well. So when you do a test, You don't have to claim to be Stuxnet Boy, but you at least have to say whereabouts on the spectrum you're doing your test. I mentioned earlier about how you actually have to do the bad behavior. That's because a breach is a process. It's not just a malware infection. So if I can install malware on your laptop, that's not a breach because maybe I can't connect to your laptop. Maybe when I do connect to your laptop, some software will stop me escalating privileges, which I need to do if I'm going to steal your encrypted passwords or put a keylogger on, that kind of thing. So you have to go through all of those stages of the attack, the full attack chain. Be like a real attacker. Time's troubling or 5? Okay. Rootkits are annoying. Next, please. If you want to test for rootkit removal, you're going to have to dump memory. There's a $10,000 way of doing it, and there's two free ways of doing it. We do the free ones. You probably want to use both because when you have an infected system, 1 or 2 of these will just break. We did a test where one of the vendors disputed the result. They said we weren't infected. So if you just click once, please, what you can see there is a file was added to the system in the local folder called server.exe. And again, please. A run entry was made, which meant that that program would run every time the Windows PC was rebooted. And finally, we have a firewall rule that will allow an incoming connection to server. And it really was called server.exe. I mean, usually they kind of hide a little bit and call it LSAS, but okay, whatever. Next, please. We can just skip that. This is a memory dump from that system. So when they said, oh, well, we weren't infected, what you can see there, those 2 green lines, that's the anti-malware product running. It's Cylance, by the way. And the yellow thing at the bottom is the memory dumping tool that we were running at the same time. And if you just click once, please, that's the malware running. That's the evidence that it really was running. But you have to test to this extent and generate this much evidence for people to actually believe that their God-given products aren't 100% perfect. Skip, please. And again. Okay, no, let's not do the rootkit stuff. Let's just get through this, please. Thank you. Keep going. This bit's really interesting, sorry. Okay, so yeah, we would use memory dumping techniques and all sorts of other bits and bobs, regardless of whether there are rootkits involved or not, simply because we don't always know if there are going to be rootkits involved or not. You can analyze it offline. The problem with rootkits, by the way, is the whole system is compromised. So if you start analyzing on that system, well, if the operating system doesn't know that there's malware on it, how are you going to know and how are your tools going to know? So you have to take it offline and test and check the data somewhere else. Here's an example of a targeted attack, and we don't have time for the demo, do we? So you have to use your imaginations. Right, so at the very beginning, if we could just come back a little, please. We've got an attacker, and he's generated a malicious PDF, which is going to be sent by a realistic vector, in this case, an email, to the recipient. Now, if you have an email gateway at that stage, that thing might enter a sandbox of some sort. It might see some bad behaviors, and it might be blocked and not get through. But unfortunately, in many cases, as we know, because we test email gateways, it will get as far as the user. At this stage, you're hoping he or she's trained well enough not to open it, but most of us believe that people want to do their job properly, so the person will open it because he wants to get the stuff done. And then a raccoon, for some reason, that's supposed to be an exploit. I didn't do this animation. The exploit happens, and it will probably then download some more code. Most of the time, the PDF won't have the full weaponization. It will go and get more stuff from the internet. And at that stage, we would hope that one of the so-called traditional anti-malware products would stop the thing because there's a signature involved. Signatures aren't always the best way, but it might. If it doesn't, bad things happen, bad behavior. And at that point, maybe one of the next-gen guys kicks in and says, oh, I see that you're escalating privileges or you're dumping credentials. So at that stage, we can detect you. But that's right at the end of the chain. There are so many opportunities along there for different products to have stopped the threat. And if you're relying on the endpoint to do it, that really is like the last ditch. The demo that we're not going to show you, but I'll just very quickly tell you what happened. Imagine that attack against Windows 10, fully updated, Windows Defender, fully updated. It didn't register anything. We completely hacked the system, and right at the end, all the logs are there, though, in Event Viewer. You just run clear event and they all just disappear. And you're left with one event which says events were cleared, which is really cool. So if we just quickly skip again, because I can't show you that. When we did that testing, lots of next-gen products didn't detect it. Lots of traditional ones didn't detect it. Some did. And yeah, it's just not very helpful, really. So we went back to all of those companies and said, look, you're missing all these things. Please fix it. And they were all, as you can imagine, initially very angry and then very grateful. Testing's really useful. You need to know when you buy this stuff if it's any good or not. It's very expensive. And if you're a large mining company and you're going to switch from one vendor to another, you're spending at least $1 million. And spending a few pounds to work out if it's any good or not is probably quite sensible. And that is me done. Thank you very much.
Okay, so first I'd like to apologize for not catching the slide and having that pulled. We do have an expectation of professionalism here. So I'm sorry that we didn't catch that in advance. And then as a chair question, before we go into it, what opportunities for research in SMART do you see?
I think the main message I'm trying to get across is that testing exists and diligent testing exists. And if you do the full attack chain when you do a test, you may be able to identify, or I may be able to identify areas in which protocols and other things can be improved. But my expertise is in being naughty, not in fixing stuff. So if I can help by being naughty, then I'll do that.
Thank you. Sorry.
Sorin Fabijdal. You mentioned something very interesting in your presentation, and I wanted to go back to pick up on that. So you mentioned that you work with different companies, and I know that one of the biggest problems that I observed the last few years is lack of collaboration. They don't change with them. So you are in a certain position, I don't know what's your contract with these companies, actually to unify this. And actually you find from different, they may not have the protection, but you may kind of open source some ideas. So is it something that you can do, or you are binded to the contracts?
No, we're not bound by any particular contracts. We often reuse data as well, but there are other things to take into account. So imagine if a big mining company said, we want to buy a web gateway. We're thinking about Fortinet and we're thinking about Cisco. And we happen to know that all of their team are already trained in Fortinet. And when we then do a test, there's not a great deal of difference between the two products. Our recommendation would probably be to stick with what you've got, because even if the alternative is slightly better, if your entire team needs to be retrained, they might not do it better. So it's more than just plugging products in as well. It's quite complicated. But yeah, very happy to share any knowledge on how different products compare. In fact, a lot of our reports are available for free off our website. So if you go to selabs.uk, you can download the endpoint stuff for free. But if you want to send me an email with more questions, really happy to help.
Also, another question is, when all this mechanism of protecting but not detecting things, and then somebody else could detect that, is it any way that you can actually, when you find these things that you, for example, had an attack and saw they couldn't prevent, but you can explain to everybody. Mm-hmm. So the next generation or next product, their product will have that in.
Yes.
That's also a really very interesting service from you. I understand your business, but I think that it's something that is missing. I was advocating for this for a few years, the collaboration. I never saw any real. So I think you have the potential for a company like yours.
Okay. We do actually do an element of that. So when you read the report, you'll see detection is not the same as protection, and some do both, and some only do some. But yeah, let's get together and talk about that.
Okay, very quick final question, then we do need to move on.
Yeah, Thiru McAfee. I had a question on Windows 10 testing that you had done. With Windows 10 is using application control, where they're sandboxing applications so that even if you download an untrusted app, it's not going to read your other files, and ransomware is not going to be possible. What kind of attacks did you see in that mode?
What kind of
attacks did you see in that mode?
Windows 10 and Defender is loads better now than it was 2 years ago. What I would say is that 2 years ago, they turned on their machine learning properly. So we were able to get past Windows 10 and Defender with almost any kind of targeted attack. It really didn't matter. Metasploit without evasions, that kind of thing. It's still possible to do. It's much harder. And escalating privileges is much harder now than it used to be. So the video I was going to show you was from 2 years ago. Probably wouldn't work now, to be honest. I mean, you can do bits and bobs. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that's what I can say about it.
2 years back it was different. So
Thank
now
you.
what's the latest attacks that you could see? That was the question. Yeah.
I think we take this offline. Thank you. And thank you for speaking. And Thomas, you're up next.
So that's okay. That's okay. Yeah, sorry. It's in a different form. That's okay. So it's my first time in this research group. Gonna understand the audience better. Who in this audience actually is actively involved in some scientific research or something? Please raise your hand. Oh, that's good. Next, who is familiar with the subject? Oh, yeah, with that one. Okay, maybe then fast forward to the slide 12 to save some time. It's the rest of it. The rest of it is available just in case somebody wants to have a deep dive in the subject, or you can just write me an email. And also this here goes the part when you should change the slides real quick. So yeah, sorry. One issue with BGP hijacking is that the public key infrastructure, which supports the operations of HTTPS and TLS protocols, it depends itself on the routing to be done properly. Next slide, please. And here's a recent story. I've done that. I've told that already in the presentation at Nano, but I'll repeat a few slides in that. So in April 2018, a cryptocurrency exchange named MyEtherWallet recorded an incident of a hijacking attack. The incident lasted for 2 hours until someone finally noticed the issue and reached out to ISPs to fix it. Here's how it basically worked. Yeah, next slide, please. So, under normal conditions, a browser starts a session with an arbitrary website with a DNS query. Next. An authoritative DNS server, which in case of myetherwallet.com used to be Amazon Route 53, responds with an IP address of a requested domain. Next. And after that, the browser sends the HTTP request, or better, fires up a TLS session with that IP address. Then the server, again hosted in our case in Amazon, responds with a TLS certificate, the signature of the letter then being checked. So what attackers did in that case was a BGP hijack of the Route 53 IP prefix, which hosted the authoritative server. And an initial query would then go to a ROG DNS server, which responded with an IP address of a server controlled by the attacker. After that, the browser sent TLS hello, which didn't go to Amazon this time, but instead went to a fake web browser in Russia. While all the traffic was being sent to the beers, all the requests were seeing a self-signed TLS certificate on the remote side. So the browser must have issued a serious scary warning, yet the attackers were able to withdraw some crypto stuff because users happily clicked through that warning anyway. What's important here is that any clear text communications in this case would have been intercepted. And during the HTTPS certificate issuance phase, certificate authorities such as Let's Encrypt usually communicate to the websites in clear text. There is next slide, please. There's a comparatively long list of publications about intercepting HTTPS with BGP hijacking. It's longer than that. Let's Encrypt has since written a post stating that they now verify the website from multiple sources, multiple verifying agents, across the internet to address exactly the hijacking problem. However, placing multiple verifying agents on the internet proves hard because even different IP networks in the internet could have similar routing coverage. As of now, there was no attempt at verifying how much of the issue is gone now with Let's Encrypt, what's still exposed, and how the consensus is reached. In fact, a research on what the most optimal way to place those verifying agents might be would be very interesting to read. The case of My Other Wallet demonstrates also how the DNS infrastructure is at risk because of hijacking. And what's important is that today's average website is a very complicated piece of technology, relying on CDNs, databases as a services, serverless functions, and other hipster stuff with complicated mechanisms of discovery, and communicates with them via the internet. At the very least, you can discover all those adjacent services through hijacking. It's not quite clear what could be done at worst, especially where e.g. a serverless endpoint authenticates itself using Web PKI, which is already demonstrated to be at risk. Next slide, please. What the consequences for other protocols could be? Here's a convenient way to think of it. Imagine a global routing is completely under the attacker's control. What could possibly go wrong for any mechanism and any piece of infrastructure you happen to run into? One example of such a mechanism is SpinBit in QUIC. It's an effective way to measure the latency between two QUIC or HTTP3 peers. Before adoption, a long discussion took place about what the SpinBit could mean for privacy. Let's say there's a person behind the VPN who prefers not to disclose their exact location. It's quite possible, but not entirely clear for now, that with BGP hijacking, to a certain extent, the location of a user could be triangulated. This area probably needs more research. Does the mic work? Okay. Yeah, okay, good. Just in case, yeah. So wherever a protocol design or an algorithm depends on a global network to perform its functions, there's potential for additional security analysis. Next question. Thanks. This is to address a question in advance about the authentication. So next slide, please. Another, yeah, that's about the route objects. Next slide, please. Yeah, here's a recent story about Disco. Disco is an experiment which was held in January. This is an ongoing research on how you can change the BGP protocol itself to reduce the exposure to hijacks. It was led by researchers from Columbia, Fraunhofer, and other universities. The ultimate goal was to use a valid standards compliant unassigned BGP attribute to enhance route origin validation. The experiment proved itself very successful in a way. It didn't succeed in doing the validation better, however. However, it has found an open vulnerability in FRR router used by some in production that causes a BGP session shutdown. That spawned a CVE advisory and a fix, so I personally declare that a success. A sad thing, though, is that apparently it's hard to conduct academic BGP experiments in wild nature because BGP software present on the internet is sometimes old, sometimes buggy, sometimes old and vulnerable, and it literally takes years to update whatever routing-related piece of code there is. A good idea, then, to set up a huge test bed with the most common BGP implementations where researchers could test their findings or even a restricted model of internet as a sandbox to play with. To date, no such test bed exists, so the researchers need to play in real internet, which sometimes brings more harm than it could be useful. Next slide, please. So another piece of research related to BGP hijacking is, Gao Rexford model of AS relations. There's a link to the paper for anyone to look through. Next, please. And this is the basis of a work being done currently in IDR and CyberOps. Does anyone remember that XKCD strip about the competing standards? There were 2 competing drafts on the subject. Now there are 3, and there's also a draft outline in the discussion that happens between the authors. So independent analysis of this work along with suggestions could be valuable, in my opinion. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions?
Any questions?
No, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have our final speaker now, and then after that we hope to have some time for discussion. So I'd like to welcome Ian Levy to talk. He's the Tech Director for NCSC. Oh, sorry, wrong. I was wrong. It's Arno. Oh no, sorry. It's a penultimate speaker. That was just a dry run. Please don't sack me. It's technically my boss. Yeah, so Arno to talk about his draft, which you may have seen class.
So hi again. Right. So I would like here to just present an ID that we prepared. It's very early times for this internet draft, and in fact we need help and feedback to actually progress. So we got a lot of feedback over the past year, and we learned our lessons and listened and understood, in fact, that we realized, are we on the same page when we speak about endpoint security? And very happy to see David's presentation and Simon's presentation before, because that actually shows some of the things here. So we try to ask ourselves, what are the capabilities and limitations of endpoint security solutions, or I call it CLES. So we did that with a few colleagues from various places. So today I just want to introduce this ID. I published it very late, so I don't expect the people who could have read it. Actually, is there anyone who read this ID, perhaps, in the room? I see a few hands. Okay, good. Thank you very much. So the reason why we came there is, are we aligned? So when we started to look at endpoint security, of course, I thought it's a problem that is not new. People are doing this since probably 2 or 3 decades now. But when we started to really ask ourselves, do we have a proper codification of endpoint security, we realized actually no. I could not find a whole reference book about this is all what you need to know about endpoint security. Okay, so the second problem is that right now we have many changes. Well, I presented the report from Symantec. David made a very good presentation about what are the new types of problems that arrive. And Simon gave a very interesting view about what he sees on his end when he received his endpoint security. So what this is about? Well, in the long term, we would like to, in fact, fill this gap and create a full review of endpoint security in all its dimensions. So at this stage, we started with endpoint models. That was an interesting problem. What is an endpoint? Is it just one side of the communication? Is it the 2 sides of the communication? So we decided to go for the 2 sides. If you go for the 2 sides, we have a problem to uniformly describe the endpoint. First problem. Second problem was the threat landscape. So that was a bad surprise. We thought that there would be a threat landscape that was agreed outside of in the community, and we could not find. The closest we found was MITRE ATT&CK, which is good, but it's not complete. We found difficulties to work with it, so we decided not to dive too much on it, but as a question, I think it's a good question for SMART, actually, should we do something specific there? Even on endpoint security capabilities, we could not find something complete either. So we have a lot on, Gartner and others speak about endpoint security in terms of what companies do, like a third-party add-on endpoint security, something that you put on top of an endpoint, but not about the whole picture. There are already in the hardware, in the operating system, in application, there are already security capabilities. So which are theirs, and what's the balance between the intrinsic capabilities and the non-intrinsic capabilities? As well, we ask ourselves, if we would have an infinite bandwidth of engineering, money, and everything, what it would look like to have an ideal endpoint security. What does it mean? And of course, the endpoint is not alone. We've seen in many examples. So on the old chain, I think David made a very good chain of from one side to the other one, all the adversaries on the chain. So what is the endpoint's position in between those two situations, and what do we learn from that, and what could mean a defense in depth? So in other words, can we share other information from other sources to help the defense? Then we looked at the endpoint security limitations. So of course, because we don't have a threat landscape, it's difficult to organize systematically the research, but that's fine. This is a good outcome from this work. And we found many. We found many things. We tried to organize them and categorize them the best way we could. And we found areas where, for sure, the endpoint cannot see the attack, or some gray areas where is the endpoint the best place to run the defense, right? Or what else we could learn from other places. And finally, we wanted to really prove ourselves that we had some real case. So we looked at our own production system, and it's a managed security service that is very well known. We run hundreds of customers, and we found actually a lot of data. So we ran that over 3 months. We had hundreds of thousands of events on hundreds of customers, and we found examples of detections that were only done by endpoints and those that were only done by network. But that was not good enough. We wanted to say, let's really look at it completely. So we started to look at regulatory aspects. So what are the other constraints we get from certification, regulations, and so on? So what's the status? It's a very early draft. We seek feedback and we look for future collaboration. I have already 2 good areas here to good persons to discuss with. So how does it look like? If we go to the next page. So in fact, I have now updated I should have updated the URL. So I published it on as a proper ID, I hope, and it is on the smart mailing list, so we can find it there. So it's very. So this is just the table of content that maps what I've explained before. And we put some placeholders, for example, like if we cover regulatory considerations, I would like to cover human rights considerations. That's why I'm very interested by what David has done, because we're going to learn, it's not my area, but I would be really happy to learn what else we should do from these considerations there. Back to what Simon explained, for example, it would be really interesting, are we sharing the same language when we speak about endpoint capabilities, endpoint security capabilities, or threats? Are we really talking about the same thing? It's actually not obvious at all. I could see that within my company, could see that with others. And even there are other organizations like the Cyber Threat Alliance, that's led by Michael Daniel, which is hosted in the US, which is a group of industry players that try to share, you are absolutely right, Simon, that share what they can for other reasons. So it's because other parties started to realize it's a busy world. We are 500 security pure players on the planet, from big ones to startups. Actually, the more there are startups, the more it creates a problem to education. Back to the points of, I don't know how many people we miss as cybersecurity specialists, but the more you add a new technology, the harder it is to defend, not the simpler. So why we need to have evidence, numbers, some people complain on numbers, but we need to get trends to prioritize all of that. So a good point. So we created that this way. Nothing is perfect or in the stone. We are completely happy to get any feedback. Let's continue. So we learned a few lessons. It was much harder than we thought initially. Frankly speaking, I thought this would exist already and we would not add value. But the good news, and the good news for SMART actually, is that I think it could generate some good research, especially in the threat landscape. We were very surprised not to find an agreed, stable, uniform approach to that. Even on the capability list, for example, on intrinsic capabilities, this is not my area. I'm sure many people could help us to understand what happens, what they do on operating system level, what they do on hardware, and so on. That would be cool. The production data from managed security services was interesting. We found around 275 distinct categories of events. And out of those, 32 were only detected by network. The rest were found by endpoints. But in the 32, we found a bunch of critical. So it's things that we cannot let away. So we can continue. And so questions for the future. So what I would like is reuse a little bit, perhaps the approach that our colleagues in TIP have done to normalize and unify the endpoint between the two sides of the communication. We would like to find better uniformity. So again, do we want to align on MITRE ATT&CK? We are about to really do it, but is it the right way or the right thing? Should it be done in this ID actually? Is it something that SMART should, or other people would like to detach and give as a full framework for other work in SMART? That could be an idea. Again, it's an inventory job, so it's long. You have to search for a lot of information from elsewhere. Another aspect, so I spoke about human rights sections. It's not my area. I would be happy to get there. I would like to get a neutral balance between regulation, human rights, industry, and other considerations. If others have real production data, I would be more than happy. And as well, I think, not sure if Simon or David made the point, but should we have an economic section? I mean, all of this costs money to build, to test, to install, to debug, to operate, and so on. And it's not coming from the blue. So, and this is as well showing you can't think about creating an hypercomputer on the endpoint. I mean, we have to find some balance as well on other aspects. So, do we have an economic section? And I think that's about it. Probably that's the last slide. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll hold questions to the end, just in the interest of time. Thank you. That's really interesting. And I do encourage everyone in the room to go and read the draft that is on the data tracker. So we will now actually have our final speaker. Sorry, Ian. This is Ian Levy, Tech Director for NCSC.
Hi. Oh, hard audience. Right. This is why it's called the one snake presentation. Come on, there's got to be a laugh there somewhere. Please, I'm dying. This is the problem with cybersecurity, right? It's all snake oil and fear. And what we're trying to do over the next sort of 15, 20 minutes is tell you what we're trying to do in the UK government to try and fix some of that. And at the end, I will come to why SMART is really important to us. Big red circle at the top, part of GCHQ. Hello, spook. Please save your ideological beatings until I have a beer. It's my only plea. Simon showed a picture of his building. This is my building. We have 2 floors in that building. It's very cyber. The reason for showing you that is not to show off. It's to say we're trying to be different. So it's a commercial building. So if any of you in London want to come see us, come see us. You do not have to go through a body cavity search to get in. Right? It's really, really important. I'll go through why in a minute. When you set up a new organization, we're only 2 years old as an organization, you need an early win. This was our early win. The Carbuncle Cup is the architectural award for the worst architecture in the UK. We won it, right? This is not bad. This is the bad bit. That came second. Okay, now onto the serious stuff. So governments are good at a few things. One of them is setting policy, right? Cybersecurity is the only part of government policy globally that's driven on fear and hyperbole. Right? We're trying to change that to be evidence-driven, like everything else. So you wouldn't want your health policy and your health interventions to be driven by, I don't know, all the healthcare providers. And yet all the data we have around cybersecurity is driven by people who are massively incentivized to make it sound worse than it is, the cybersecurity companies. We're trying to change that. The thing that I have learned over the last 15 years of trying to do this is people like us don't fix the problems. We need everybody in the UK, worldwide, to be able to understand cybersecurity, to be able to enact it. Because in the end, it's risk management, right? Everybody does risk management every day of the week. We just need to internalize it so people can do it better. I hate the C word as well, but I'm stuck with it. It's part of the organization name, sorry. So an example, password. So we give 2 monumentally stupid pieces of advice. Have a different password for every service and change it every 28.6 days, because it sounds like we calculated it. And don't click on links or open attachments in emails unless you trust them, right? When it comes to both of those. So the first one is about reducing the burden on people. So we published this in 2017, and it said people should be able to use password managers, right? Because they're better. They are easier to use. They are better for people. Basically, this was calling out the financial services industry, so the banks, because they all suck. Right? And we're saying, you keep telling us it's a security reason that people can't use password managers on their retail banking sites. Could somebody please explain to us what that security reason is? Because we couldn't work it out. Nobody's ever done that. Next one. This is July last year, and this has got nothing to do with us. This is people on the interwebs, on Twitter, complaining about Barclaycard Business and saying, why can't I use a password manager? Barclaycard Business coming back and saying, oh, well, we've got our own special security. You don't need one of those. And then it descends into the typical Twitter flame war. 2 days later, Barclaycard changed their policy. Right? That's about trying to get the UK populace to make security better. It's not going to be us. And then there's the same example with Troy Hunt, Have I Been Pwned? Somebody mentioned it before, quoting our guidance to Nationwide, a UK building society. Same thing. How do we get people to better use cybersecurity? Next one. Don't open a link or an attachment unless you trust the email. So does anybody know a guy called Sinon Reborn? He's internet prankster. He's the guy that went to Rince Priebus and Jared Kushner in the White House, made them say really stupid things over email and then published them all. He's awesome. He had a go at me, and I was really, really, really lucky. I mean, really, I was on the Eurostar, and I had 2 bottles of wine, little bottles of wine, not big bottles of wine, just for clarity. And those 2 emails turned up. Paul Chichester, they're screenshots on my phone. Paul Chichester is our director of ops. Right? I was that close to replying to it, and I didn't. But I ended up talking to the guy over email. We ended up writing this blog together, which is him as the attacker saying, here's what I was trying to achieve, and me as the victim going, here's what it felt like. And saying, I was really, really lucky, because those UXs suck. There is nothing there that the average person can use as a cue to go, hang on, this is a bit dodgy. Nothing. Okay? And this is making up for problems with protocols that we designed 20 years ago. Okay? The fact that the content and the envelope are not cryptographically bound is a pain in the backside. Right, next one. Somebody mentioned IoT before. It's one of those things, it's like cyber. It's an evil word and we should ban it, but we have it. We published this last year. This is the UK's view on cyber security for IoT devices. So this is things that vendors have to sign up to, or should sign up to. It's really complicated, things like shouldn't have any non-changeable credentials. Things like you should patch the damn thing and tell people how long you're going to do that for. Things like you should have a vulnerability disclosure policy, all the way down to no external DMA capable interfaces. So we published that, and a load of vendors have gone, okay, consumers haven't got a clue what it's about, but we're going to do that. So you can choose food based on whether it's going to kill you or taste nice, right? We're going to do the same for IoT devices. Red or green. So 3 things to start with, red or green, and get retailers to only stock things that have got 3 greens. So build a market around cybersecurity because there isn't one today. We care about 2 broad classes of things. We care about nation state attacks and we care about the 66 million people who live in the UK. We're from the government, we're here to help. This is what I'm trying to do for the 66 million people in the UK, right? Protect them the majority of the time from the majority of harm, from the majority of attacks. Next. Back in 2017, we published this. There's a big blog that goes in. This is all on the NCSC website, by the way. The problem with going last is people have stolen all my thunder. So BGP, yes, BGP sucks. It sucks in a way that people don't understand. It's worse than we just heard, much, much worse. So we're building a national scale BGP platform where all the ISPs can peer and we can spot bad stuff and stop it taking effect. We've done an alpha experiment, it seems to work, we're going to scale it. If it works, we'll publish. We are DNS for public sector being central government, local government and some other bits, not people. Let's be clear, we'll get to it in a minute. We do takedowns, we do DMARC, we do all the things that have been around for years but have never been done at scale. I'm going to talk about some of the things we found over the last couple of years. Next one. Oh yeah, we publish all of this. So that's a 70-odd page report with all the data behind what we found in the first year. The next version should be out in a couple of weeks, hopefully, when I finish writing it. But the idea for this is put some objective, unbiased data out there so that people can do proper scientific research on this. So DMARC, hands up about DMARC. So this is about allowing domain owners to take control over how their mail is delivered or not. So we've been saying for years, people should do DMARC. And everybody goes, it's really hard. Okay, we're government, we're stupid. I've got 6,974 government domains registered on my central DMARC processing platform. 1,369 are on P equals quarantine and 572 are on P equals reject. And that's after 18 months. We started off at 4. Can't be that hard if government can do that. We came up with a way of synthesizing DMARC records for non-existent subdomains, so ianlevy.gov.uk. In the 4 months there, we generated 430,000 synthetic DMARC because we're stopping people use the brands that government owns, like HMRC, which is our tax authority, stopping them using that brand in lots of different ways, which I'll get to. So they're going to other things. So instead of going for taxrefund@gov.uk, they moved to taxrefund@taxrefund.gov.uk, which doesn't exist. And so we had to work out how to protect that and stop people abusing our domains and things that look like our domains to spoof people. HMRC's rank in terms of global phishing, when we started 2 years ago, was 16th. So it was the 16th most phished brand in the world. And it's a tax office. They generally take money instead of giving it, but hey, we're now at 146th. Okay, so with some intervention, you can have an effect. Simple stuff done at scale can have an effect. Next one, Kirsty, please. We do takedowns. So we do takedowns by the very, very complicated cyber thing of emailing the provider and asking them to take it down because it's breaching their own terms and conditions. Okay, this is not rappelling down the outside of a data center in black. This is just enforcing providers' own T's and C's. Again, this will all be it's all on the website, all in the report. If you see the next one. Arno mentioned JavaScript skimmers. Yeah. So we did a thing in the UK where we looked for Magento e-commerce sites that were installed and had been compromised by MageCart. So they had some JavaScript stuck on the checkout page, just copies all the stuff off to a third party. This is one of the notifications we give. It's about 2,500 in 3 months. We'll get to the numbers in a minute. But these are all small businesses. And somebody asked, how did they get on? Was it cross-site scripting? No, they just didn't patch the thing because they bought it from their web hoster who gave it as a free package, but not with any support. Right? These are the sorts of things we need to change. Next. These are what I would call deceptive domains. So these are domains that have been registered purely to look like something that I care about. So something to do with the UK government. Every single one of these had an SSL certificate. Let's Encrypt, cPanel, usually one of those two. Okay? And we've spent the last 20 years training the populace to go, padlock means safe. Does it buggery? Right? And don't start training me about domain validated versus organizational validated versus extended validation, because 66 million people in the UK don't care and don't know how to check. And me trying to explain it to them is not the right way to fix this. Oh, you've broken it. You go back. No? No? Okay. That had, go to the next one. This is our public sector DNS. So this is central government, local government, things like that. So in 2018, we're protecting about 1.5 million public sector employees. So remember, this has got nothing to do with the public, it's public sector. We blocked 57.5 million queries out of 68 billion. Yippee, says all the ISPs in the room. But 28 million queries relating to DGAs, including Conficker. 2007. And it's still running somewhere in the UK public sector. I'm quite proud of that, actually. You can read the numbers, right? Look at the penultimate line. I've got 450,000 queries in a year for WannaCry domains. 4 minutes. Okay. Next one. We take stuff down that pretends to be UK government. Those are the numbers, and obviously the slides are on Data Tracker, so you can look yourself. We take down a lot of stuff that pretends to be UK government. Next. If you host anything bad in the UK, bad means malware, command and control, phishing, anything like that, we will go and ask the providers to take it down. Before we started, the median uptime for those sites was 27 hours. Now it's 45 minutes. Doesn't make any difference if just we do it, and we've taken down 138,000. If everybody who's responsible about their delegated IP space does this, you make it much, much harder to host bad stuff. So let's do that. Next. Next. 2,333 credit card skimmers in 3 months. That was our major cart stuff. Next. Scaling. So we're asking ISPs in the UK to protect their customers by default for free. Okay? Now you can opt out, and that's fine. This isn't our data, this is commercial data. But BT have announced they've got 6 million residential customers, and they protected, well, they stopped 135 million malware C2s in a month. Right, this problem is not going away. We've dealt with 1,500, more than 1,500 national scale incidents in 2 years. Next. I was going to talk about Russians attacking telcos, but I won't. Next. Next. It's on the website, you can read it. This is an interesting infographic. So in the sort of 9 months there, these are the sectors that were attacked and roughly how often. So these are the number of incidents that we have done. Next. Going back to what Rob Joyce said, it's not zero-day wielding nation states. We've done root cause analysis on most of those, not all of them. There are 3 things that matter. Okay, the 3 root causes for those incidents. That's number 1. Yeah, admins browsing the web with their admin account. Sorry, too stupid to help now. Next. What have you got connected to the internet? It's actually a really hard question to answer. Everybody thinks it's easy, it really isn't. Credentials matter. If somebody phishing you and getting your password is the key to your entire network security, you're probably doing it wrong. But it's not simple to do 2FA everywhere. So why SMART? Next. Starting to bake security into protocols in a way that was never done before. Designs of those protocols need to be cognizant of actual attacks and the way attackers actually work. Next. People are part of protocols. I know you guys don't want to do UX, but you have to find ways of giving UX designers really high quality information to present to people so they can make better decisions. Just go back to my iPhone screenshots. Right? It is impossible for the majority of people to make sensible decisions today. Always, always, always remember, bad guys use your shiny too. Right? Just because you think it's great, yeah, TLS is a great example, right? Certificates. Yeah, let's encrypt, great. Bad guys are the main proponents of those. Always remember the bad guys use the shiny. And remember, adversaries are not passive. So you do something, they will respond. And we've got a bunch of stuff that we've shown where we've done something that adversaries have responded. Sometimes in a good way, i.e. they've gone to France. Sorry, Arno. Sometimes in a... I don't think it gets a better laugh than that. I'm upset. Sometimes in a bad way because they move to somewhere that's harder for us to manage. But adversaries are never passive. Okay, this is the only time I'm going to say encryption. Security is not the same as encryption. Security is much, 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 much bigger than encryption. Of course, encryption is important, but encrypting something does not make it secure. Some of the side effects of changing how protocols work scale really badly from a security point of view. Security, privacy, and resilience are all totally different things. And again, this is my last point. The stuff that's built in the IETF, because of convergence, is starting to underpin critical infrastructure in a way it never did before. And so resilience becomes really, really, really important. And if we do it badly, security and resilience are incompatible. But they didn't need to be. And that's why you guys need to help. I think that's it.
Thank you very much. So we have a very short amount of time here. I'm hoping that people see the real need as a minimum coming out of this and some of the ideas for research. My hope is that researchers will help to develop drafts and so that we have a richer queue of work that SMART could do for review on a next session. So that's one of my hopeful outcomes of this, that this stimulates additional conversation. So go ahead.
Yeah, you may switch to the slide 29 with the percentages of attacks. Yeah, next. Sorry. Yeah, next. Yes. So there's a huge amount of security incidents in academia sector. Do you have any explanations for that?
Academic freedom. So you go talk to researchers, a lot of them don't want their organizations to do anything to manage their traffic for them because they think they should be going and doing stuff.
And that's still reported as a security
That's number
incident.
one. Number two is they're a big target.
So just quickly before the next question, for anyone who has to leave now, we are planning to go to the bar after this. So we'll have plenty of time for questions in the bar, just to be clear.
And there's always the mailing list. Go ahead.
But mainly the bar.
This would be very interesting to see scaled by the size of the targets as well, to see what the ratios are to the different fields, just in response to that
By
follow-up.
the size of the sector or the size of the
You said
organizations?
academia's big targets, that's why that's a big blob. So does it just representing the fact that there's more systems, or is it?
No, so remember, this isn't percentage, this is actual numbers.
Right, no,
So-
I know, that's what I'm saying. If you did this scaled by the size of the sector itself, it might be an interesting breakdown. That's a side note.
Interesting.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Daniel Kahn-Gilmore. I'm with the ACLU. So I want to thank you for bringing this here, and I really want to echo a couple of points that you made, which I think are right on, and that the IETF really needs to get behind. And that is that people are an increasingly important part of protocols, and that the user interface failures are really serious failures. And we like to pretend here that we work at the networking layer alone. So we're just going to put our blinders on and pretend that somebody higher up the stack will fix it. Well, we need to actually, even if we don't design UI, and I don't design UI, we need to be thinking about what our protocols do, expose, what kind of signals they can expose to the UI layer, which may mean that we need to have UI people come here and tell us what signals they need or what signals they think they can work with. So I think that's a really critical part. And the second thing that you said that I want to really highlight and boost is remember that bad guys use the shiny too, right? And that goes for, I think, unfortunately, almost all of the types of systems that you've described that you're using. So one of the concerns that I have with the systems that say, oh yeah, well, we just call up, we have our friendly arrangements with the various big providers and we call them up and we say, hey, you should take this thing down. That's a shiny. And the bad guys use that shiny too. They say, hey, wouldn't it be a shame if you had to stop doing business in our country? If, that would be a shame. But if you take this thing down or you dehost them, then we're happy to continue to let you work in the network. So of the types of mechanisms that you're using, I appreciate the amount of security that you've done, but there are real risks in having those types of relationships be so easily used.
So totally agree with you, which is why we don't do it. Back one.
So,
that's it, stop.
Oh.
What does it say at the bottom? Netcraft. So we don't serve legal order on people. We use Netcraft. We've been doing this for 30 years in brand protection. Say, hey, government's just a brand. UK IP space is just a brand.
Cool.
Use the well-established things because government's sticking their oar in. It's probably not a great idea at this point.
Right. So the combination of those 2 points, though, I realize you didn't present on this here, but you and I think Robinson presented this proposal that's now known as the GHOST proposal.
Yep.
And that proposal seems to itself be a way to say that we should make the user interface less responsive, right, by not showing users who's involved in an encrypted communication session.
No,
I just wanted to highlight that there's a tension there, and I'm happy to talk with you about it afterwards.
So let's talk in the bar.
Okay.
For those that don't know what we're talking about, it's a Lawfare article that I published last year about end-to-end encryption and law enforcement access. And the point of the article wasn't to say we should do that thing. It was to say we need to have a conversation about how we do these things.
Right.
Otherwise, bad's going to happen.
But that thing is definitely a part about where the user interface is a part of the protocol and needs to be understood that way.
Absolutely right.
Yep.
Thank you. So I would love to let the line clear. We are over on time. So before anyone leaves, I'm interested to know, with a show of hands quickly, who is interested in contributing work if this were to become or at least a proposed research group, or reviewing work? Just wonderful. Thank you. Alyssa?
So are you finishing because the time is out, or?
No, I said let's clear the queue before I said all of that. So please go ahead.
So I have a question for you two, not for Ian. So would you rather take questions for Ian first?
I think at this point, we're over on time, so go for it. So we'll just do what we need to.
Sure.
Or until we get kicked out.
Great. Alyssa Cooper. So my question for the chairs is, have two questions actually. One is, if you were to go forward as a proposed research group, would you expect sort of the scope of contributions and work to be similar to what we saw here today in terms of kind of the mix of everything presented? And then second question is, what would your expectation be around the kind of closeness of the relationship between work that's going on in the IETF and the kinds of things that were presented today? Some of the things were pretty far attenuated from anything that's going on in the IETF.
Sure. So I think what came up through some of the presentations is the time scale with the research. Some of these would be further out, so we wouldn't expect to see some of the areas come in too quickly. I think we need to see what comes in terms of actual research. The drafts from Symantec is a really good starting point with the increased use of encryption so that we actually could ensure the deployment of more secure technologies. How do we do better endpoint detection? So I think that's a really valuable contribution and very timely. I think we have to see what comes in and what people are interested to work on. And if it's research, then it would be here. If it's more tactical, then IETF, and figure that out with the security area directors and SEC dispatch and the available tools at hand and guidance. So we're obviously open to guidance to make this successful, and scoping is usually important, right? So.
And also, Toma mentioned at the end of his talk, drafts that the group could look at and bring a cyber defense perspective to reviewing those protocols. So that is very tied to IETF. So I think there's quite a spread in terms of the work that could be done. But the tie back to protocols, this is the reason that SMART is hoping to be in the IRTF.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, thanks for all the interesting presentations. Your presentation was particularly entertaining, and I was laughing in the back, just so you know. I've looked at this sort of research group attempt before, and one of the biggest challenges we have is bringing the researchers to us. Sorry, so Elliot Lear here. I was saying that one of the biggest challenges we have are bringing the researchers to us. And there are a couple of different conferences that already, I think, angle in this direction very closely. One of them is WISE, the Workshop on the Economics of Information Security. Security of Human Behavior is another one. We have a couple like NDSS that ISOC hosts that I think also intersects this. And so one of the things I think that the chair should think about, the IRSG should think about, the IRTF chair should think about is how are you going to bring those people here? You have people like Angela Sass in London, for instance. You have all folks all over the country here that focus on user interface. You have economists who look at these problems, looking at the Gordon Loeb model, for instance. How do you bring these people into the room? And then how can they deliver into the IETF in terms of meaningful things that we could do later on?
Thank you. So a couple of points on that. So firstly, speaking with the chairs of MAPRG, they've noted that some talks that have gone in there previously would have perhaps been research that should or would have come to SMART if SMART existed. So there's definitely research that's already coming in. And I've had quite a few calls with various academics, universities in America and the UK who are doing research that we think would be interesting to bring here. So, and we managed to get them interested on the basis of just having a mailing list, so without even really being a proposed group. So I think the interest is there for people to come. They said they would be interested in coming if the group gets proposed.
Can I add to that? So you mentioned Angela Sassa. So she was the chair of our first research institute that we set up 5-6 years ago on the science of cybersecurity. So if this group exists, I am more than happy to say that our research institutes, which are independent of us but funded, will contribute, because they're the 5 things we really care about. How do we get the stuff out there?
Brett Jordan. I just want to thank all the presenters today. I think this was brilliant. By the numbers of people that are here, I think it's clearly evident that this is of use, and I think there's people of value. My question is to the chairs: what is the next step, and how do we actually get IETF, IRTF, or whoever to approve this moving forward, because it seems like there is enough people here of interest.
That is a good question, and we can discuss that in the bar. We're keen to move it forward, and it's great to have the support. Thank you.
Al Morton, two things. One, thank you for your apology, quick and effective, about the ASCII art. Number two, in both the chair's defense, I downloaded that deck of slides, I looked at it in PowerPoint editing mode, and that picture was not evident. So if you guys did the same thing, you would have missed it too. And I missed it in time to tell you. So don't feel bad about that. Thanks for the apology.
Thank you, Al.
Okay, I guess that wraps it up. Thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you in the bar.